Hello, how are you today?
Good.
Happy Monday.
Yeah.
Things are starting to feel kind of hectic in the semester. Hang in there. Deep breaths. One foot in front of the other. Now is the time to reevaluate distribution of time among different efforts, kind of thing. You will get your exams back in and hand it back at the end. Overall, pretty good. I know. If I hand it back now, you guys are going to be focused only on that and not on what I want you to focus on. Okay. So what I'd like to do today is we're going to finish up talking about good science writing. You all over the weekend did an analysis of some writing samples. And we're going to decide if each sample was an example of plagiarism, and if so, what kind. We're going to discuss your summaries of Hendry et al. 2006 methods and results sections. Now we're going to talk a little bit about basic genetics. We're going to define some terms. We're going to talk about Mendel's principles of segregation. I don't know if we'll get to independent assortment. In fact, I know we won't today. We'll do that next time. And we'll see at least an example of a Punnett square, and if we have time, we can practice it together. Sound good? All right. So what I'd like you to do is start out by pulling out those writing examples, those little writing samples, and sharing in your group whether or not you think each sample is or is not an example of plagiarism. If so, what type? Oh yeah, I know. Austin, you maybe so happy right now. Clustering in together with your group. 5, man.
Yeah. That'd be better if it
Awesome. This is why I put those tables together, so they're not along.
Yeah, it's just hard.
No, I know. There's a legit front to the room. It makes it hard.
This is
it's not good, right? And then you decide the quote, like whether you follow the quotes, then you decide to end it. Yeah. Bad writing. It's happy. Yeah. But it's not like it's a person who has been doing what you have to over here. Yeah.
I thought it was. They use like modified text.
Yeah. I said they use a lot of jargon. There's like some similar sentence structure. Yeah. They say there would be specific they're guessing that they would
Well, I also
Yeah, it's not the type of paraphrase you want there used to was like previous knowledge or like stuff that they would like knowing for the and the first and last sentences. Other than that, though, I think it's not bad. All right, sounds like maybe we're getting to the end of those. I need a little bit of time. I say like this side. Yeah. All right. So if you go to iTunes View, you will be able to see some types of plagiarism listed out. I know you guys listed some types last time. You may not need that. We're going to look at this plagiarism exercise. Maybe I don't want to show you the answers right away. All right, so let's talk about the first one. All right, so the author writes, Young et al., 2004, showed that natural selection by loggerhead shrikes favors longhorns in the flat-tailed horned lizard, end quote. Their data show that, quote, selection is stronger on the length of the squamosal than on the length of the part of horns, end quote, and that, quote, because shrike predation attempts are marked by desiccated skulls of horned lizards hanging in trees, which is, end quote, the selection is linked to an, quote, identifiable agent, end quote. Plagiarism? I see some nodding from photosynthesis. Okay, and chaparrals? Nodding? I didn't.
Mostly, because most of the idea is made up of just quotes, it's pretty evident, or at least it's possible, it's reasonable to infer that the writer has no idea what they're talking about, so they're just using the words of the person, even if it's quoted and cited, and they're still just not creating anything else.
Okay, so Isaac brings up two important points. It's quoted, so there are quotations around the exact wording, and it is cited. Okay, so as a scientist reading that, you think, I think this person doesn't actually know what the authors were saying because most of it is quoted. So certainly it's an example of not great science writing, right? And I have to warn you, these are not things written by students. These are things written by fluency as examples. So we're not like throwing students under the bus. This student was terrible. This is us generating examples. Okay, so definitely an example of bad science writing. And I do think that you could probably make an argument for, since most of the ideas, the majority of that work comes from a different source, some sticklers could say that that's plagiarism. I would say it's not strictly plagiarism, but certainly the majority of the ideas and words are coming from a source, a source that is not the author of the assignment.
And when you see actual science writing, it's clear that this is talking about information from analysis. The fact that we realized you on Friday told them that to be safe, you can just put the citation in your sentence. But in actual science writing, scientists don't actually write that way. If it's clear that you continue to talk about a study,
right,
you don't have to put that citation in every sentence.
You do not have to cite every sentence.
As long as those sentences are connected in narrative, it's clear that you continue to talk about that sentence.
Right, such that if you were to shift to your own idea or to someone else's idea, it would be obvious where that shift occurred, so there would be no confusion as to who was writing which idea.
Is it a dongle issue? Because I have a dongle.
It's not a dongle, it's the actual HDMI cord, and I may just switch to the Apple TV.
So in the second sentence, it says there, THEIR. Well, that basically is referring you back to the vowel, which was cited at the beginning of the first sentence. So it's still, it's clear from the writing that you're still referring to the same study. I would not refer to this. I would not grade this as plagiarized, but you would definitely get an F on paper if this way, because you basically didn't paraphrase. And what's the goal of having you paraphrase things?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're paraphrasing effectively, that signals to us that you actually understand what you've been reading. That's what we're shooting for.
Yeah, for sure.
Now
Okay.
stop talking since you're not on ITV.
Thank you so much. Now that it's on Apple TV, I should not have that issue. My apologies. Okay, so example 2. Recent study of selection imposed on flat-tailed horned lizards by Locker and Shrike showed that there was moderate positive directional selection on parietal and squamosal horn length. Citation. Young et al. Found that selection is stronger on the length of the squamosal than on the length of the parietal horns, et cetera, et cetera. What problems do we find with this, if any? Chicken strips. What do you think? You guys did this part, right? All right, speak up, man.
I said that the last sentence was like almost word for word. One of the recording sentences in the paper.
Okay, but they have cited the paper. So is that a problem if your wording is the same or almost word for word if you've cited it?
Isn't that
Absolutely. So if you are going to have, you should not have similar wording. If you do, it better be because it's exact wording and it's in a quote. And what we talked about last time is, when do you quote in science writing? Only when it's something that people might not believe the other person said. Exactly, that's out.
What jumps out at you? Paper.
Do you think you would write in this style? Maybe not. What about it seems a little too, what about it makes the voice of the author sound wrong? Like in it. Caleb?
It's like really scientific and like them saying full standard deviation. Like they should just summarize it in a different word that's simplify it, not just using like the concept, because somebody who's reading and doesn't know won't understand what it means.
Right, so almost instead of a summary, it sounds like the actual report. It's very exacting, right? And not just exacting as far as being specific, but it's very detailed, right? And has very particular phrasing. What would you add to that?
You know how I spot figures in student papers? I don't stick your paper in and turn it in. I don't scan it. I don't use some online service. I read your paper word for word, and when the voice changes, I know that that's plagiarized because I was hearing your voice in your writing, and then all of a sudden I started hearing someone else.
Yeah. It's actually really nice to see. So, this is the first time that I participated in this first year course at Jewel. I typically do both of the sophomore level biology courses, and I can watch your writing evolve, which is really cool because you all have voices, you have ways in which you say things. And I can watch that really build with time. And you do have a very particular voice when you write, and it's refreshing, it's nice. That's why, you know, if everybody had the same way of expressing things, reading stuff would be super dreadfully boring for me.
And even if I can't remember your voice from assignment to assignment, in the process of reading a given assignment, very quickly I get a feel for what your voice is. And so then when I see somebody else's voice, it's like jarring. It literally just kind of leaves.
All right, what about example 3? It's not quite as jarringly sort of specific phrases. Do we find problems with example 3? What about Jack? Jack.
I didn't like the phrase significant phenotypic evolution because they hadn't concluded that yet. It's more of a preliminary, so you say, hey, this relationship may be causation, causal, but it's not for sure evolution yet.
Okay, so scientifically, maybe they were overstating their case.
Yeah, they tried to paraphrase and they kind of missed the mark and went into some misinformation.
Okay, so your perception is that they're trying to paraphrase, but because they're not really understanding it, they're paraphrasing it into something it doesn't quite mean. Okay, all right. Other thoughts on this one? Gabe, what did you think of this one? Okay, so if you had to, there wasn't quite right. So if you had to give this kind of a title, what would you call their method of paraphrasing? If you had to describe it to somebody else, what do you think the process was that the author went through to paraphrase this?
And to me, they essentially just like took the sentences and then around, maybe changed the words, just like inadequate.
Okay, so we talked about how to avoid that. We talked about some methods on how to avoid that last time. What are some of the methods that we talked about that would prevent you from accidentally making this mistake?
You said that you like to read it and just read it the way the paper, think about it, like write down what your thoughts were on it, and then write based off of the notes, not off of that way.
Right, and I forget maybe if it was you or someone else that had said read the whole paper. I think it was Kelsey. You had said read the whole paper and then summarize, rather than reading each sentence and paraphrasing each sentence, or reading each paragraph and trying to paraphrase each paragraph. Get an idea of everything all together before you try to do this. I think it's a really good guideline. So example 3, although you're saying that maybe it's not quite paraphrased enough, I would not have too many problems with it. I think that although it's a bit technical, I think it's an okay paraphrasing. I would disagree maybe with the strength of the conclusion, but that wouldn't necessarily flag me that there's plagiarism going on. So I think that there's some room for interpretation. I agree with you, it's probably an over-interpretation because there's not causality shown there. But I would say, actually, this is getting toward adequate paraphrasing. I would prefer that, like Kennedy said, that it was maybe a little less, let's paraphrase this sentence and then paraphrase this sentence. But if you look at the original paper, if this was in the section of your paper where you were summarizing the conclusion of the study, then I would say that's probably adequate.
But perhaps the reason why the paraphrasing is a little bit borderline is because of using such phrases as significant phenotypic evolution.
Right.
Using jargon limits.
Right, and that's what, I think that's what popped out to Jordan, is that they're using a sort of jargony phrase, right? And that would be a cue for my eyeballs to look more closely at the passage to make sure that there was adequate paraphrasing. So this is one of those cases where maybe you don't want to use the jargon, maybe you want to talk about it in a slightly different way.
And it is jargony, and we're not telling you to not use field appropriate terminology.
Right.
But one of the other reasons that this is maybe a little bit task is I wrote all of this.
Right, and Dr. Kowinski writes scientific papers all the time. So if something that sounds a little too jargony to you might not sound super jargony to him.
So in that, you're hearing my voice
Right.
to a certain degree. And one of the comments that a student made to me, it's probably over a decade ago now, is after class one day, she said, one of my problems with you in class is that you talk like you write. And you'll notice in class that I sometimes talk kind of like this, and then I write kind of like this. So what you're seeing is my voice. The other thing is, I've read this paper way more times than anybody should read a one-page science paper.
Probably more than the authors read the final version.
Possibly more than authors.
I would say like very possible, 99% sure, probably you've read this more times than.
So I also remember fine details of the paper, not because I have an identical or anything else, it's just I've read this thing.
Right. And so this goes back to reading it and then putting it away for long enough that you're not going to remember those exact phrases, like Dr. Kowinski.
Yeah, and when you read anything that short that many times, you're going to remember a lot.
Right. Yep. Okay.
That was written, I intentionally wrote that to be a valid paraphrase. I sat down and wrote example 3 without paper next to me. All the other ones that I was trying to create visualized text, I had to have paper next to me.
Right. Cody, did you have a question or are you stretching? Okay. All right, so this is supposed to be the example of the valid paraphrasing. Okay, I would agree that I would be like, significant phenotypic evolution. I might look at that a little more closely.
And I see that sometimes in papers. I see, oh, good use of appropriate terminology, and my little alarm bells go off, and then I go back to the page and I look around.
And you look at it and you're like, nope, that's good,
No,
appropriate use of terminology.
It's just good writing.
Yeah, so we're not going to nail you if you use any similar phrase. Sometimes there are appropriate ways to say things. Okay, example 4. Caleb, what did you think of example 4?
I think it was any.
No plagiarism in example 4? What do you guys think? The first sentence is word for word. Okay. What about the rest of it? Is there any problems in the rest of it? Bryce, what do you think?
They didn't use proper citations, but they still mentioned the name of their using.
Well, I mean, they've cited the paper, what, twice. So can you tell me more about that?
I was just going to say that it's not like the proper citation, like
Oh, okay. Well, yes. So that's the way you're used to citing things, and that is absolutely an appropriate way of citing things. You can also cite them by simply putting the parentheses after their name. So although that's different than what you're used to, it is also appropriate.
And it's cleaner, it takes fewer words.
Right. It clutters up the page less. What do you think, Chris?
I mean, besides the first sentence, I think they do a good job of paraphrasing where they need to and giving credit where they need to.
They did an okay job. I'll highlight though for you. This one, of course, we talked about the first sentence being word for word. But I'll highlight for you the other portions that are word for word.
The first sentence isn't word for word.
I think it is.
Predation is difficult to document in life.
Ah.
Almost impossible to observe is just substituted for difficult to document. It's a form of plagiarism that I first learned of as mosaic plagiarism. I'm sorry, substitution plagiarism, where you just basically put in synonyms for words. And it's the type of plagiarism that is almost impossible for Turnitin to spot.
Okay, I'm going to highlight some other portions, though, that are also plagiarized. All right, so this one is probably the most extensive example of plagiarism in the batch.
I pulled out all the tricks on this one.
Yeah, it is a combination of, what you might call a potluck, right? You're taking phrases from here and there and here and there and here and there throughout the paper, and you're putting them all together for a big meal. Along with what we would call sort of a pour de size, so sort of find and replace. You take a sentence and you replace. What was it? Difficult to detect.
Difficult to document.
Okay, and you put almost impossible to observe. Okay, so you're going to try to swap out a phrase, but the rest of the other, 16, 20 words in the sentence are the same.
So pull off the soft tissue, strip off the soft tissue, etc.
Right. Okay. So that one, even though Turnitin is not great at that, Turnitin will catch some portion of that, which will then, if we needed it, draw our eye to the other sections of it as well. All right, so this last one, what do you think about example 5? There's no citation at all. There's no citation or reference at all. Is that a problem? Yeah, that's a problem, for sure. Is there anything else that strikes you as odd about it, or is that just really the only thing that's going on here? That's not a trick question, that's a real question. When you looked at it, did you identify any phrases or sentences that were taken directly from the paper? Otherwise, this is pretty good, right? Yeah, just have to add that citation in there. All right, was this hard? Parts of it hard, parts of it easy? What did you think when you were going through and looking at it?
Example 4 fooled me.
Example 4 fooled you. They did it really well, right?
Yeah, I think for me it was like easier to tell when they were plagiarizing when the writing was just bad. Like example 4, I could tell because there was like a jump in ideas really quickly, and so I knew they probably were plagiarizing because they didn't even bother to use a transition to ideas.
So when you're really familiar with the paper that the student is writing on, or when you're the student, or when you're the author of whatever's being written, sometimes it's easy to not have great flow in that writing because you're really familiar with all the different details in the paper. When you are the reader of the paper and you're going through and reading, you're going for the ride. That author is taking you for a ride, and they're going to take you from point A to point B. And if you don't cross all the points between point A and point B, then it's going to be pretty obvious that there's some jumping around going on, and that choppiness can sometimes point to not really understanding the whole overall vision of what the paper is writing about. Okay, thank you for participating in that. Okay. Do you guys feel like you have some good tools, some good understanding of what to avoid, and maybe some good tools for avoiding that? Do you have any sort of remaining questions about what you should do in particular situations? I went ahead and posted slides. I know we didn't have slides on Friday, right? I mean, I had them, but I was recording. I went ahead and posted slides to iTunes U, kind of summarize what we went over and give some details from Friday's lecture. So please look at those before you do the final version, certainly, of your overall Henry et al. Summary, and certainly before the next exam as well.
Guidelines for the literature summary are now up, as well as the grading rubric used to grade those things, so you can look at that. After we talk about the results and methods and results today, that's the last in-class discussion we'll be having until the day we actually discuss it before leaving class. So take all of that that we talked about, take your conversations you have at your table today, and use those to craft the best summary you can, given the guidelines to the discussion.
Yeah, and it's having the rubric ahead of time is golden. It's a fantastic tool. So after you're done writing, you sit down and you use the right rubric to grade your own paper. And you're like, oh, I forgot to do this. And you can go back and fix it. You'll know exactly how we're going to grade you before you even turn it in. Sound good? All right. Okay, let's transition into discussing the your summary of methods and results. Please pull out your summaries. I want to hear lots of active discussion. Probably best to kind of break off in pairs or maybe groups of 3 at the most to talk about your summaries of methods and results to make sure that you understood the methods and understood the results and have them complete.
Pairs would be best, so if you're in a group of 5, just find somebody in an adjacent group. It's too big, you don't have time to discuss everything that's in your paper.
Right. So pairs are best. If you've got an odd number at your table, look around and find another odd number table. Find a partner.
What I got out of it was they're measuring the length, width, and depth. And due to there being a lot of sciences group, they all measured it different ways. So we couldn't really compare it. And so they had use external councils to make it easier to compare and that kind
All I did, like instead of like all I did was outside, and that's all I was right.
Okay, time you
Like worry about like your introduction I'm like, but I can still say that then you're like, I looked at all the birds.
We have like 30 days on roster.
Right?
Yeah, it's like
I just kind of like really want
No, I just Will. Yeah, there's number one. Yes.
Yeah. I love writing
there's a lot of people like to do this to
Really?
there's so many of these. Do what we did this year.
I played like I started every game. Yeah, some freshmen start like 2 or 3. There's just freshmen like just kind He used to be pretty good. He used to be pretty good. Well, like, when there's 30 seconds left, I know there's 30 seconds left.
Don't worry about that's a good idea. Yeah, I just need like, I like working in here, I like getting stuff done. I feel more focused when I'm looks I have a 9 a.m. so I was like, I'm not going
There's no way I can.
I know that some of you are done discussing. Some of you would probably need more time, but we're going to bring it to a close. One last thing that that we like to emphasize is that there are different styles in which you can summarize things. You can summarize things in a really technical way. When you do that, your instructors don't know whether you understand those words or whether you're just taking them in the, like looking at the context in which they're used and sort of taking your best shot at it.
Oh, no, we understand that you don't understand. You oftentimes use the jargon incorrectly.
Right, right. I was trying to be gentle about that. It's true, it's true. Don't use the jargon. Try not to be super technical. What you should do is write it as if you are going to explain it to your grandma, your grandpa, or a roommate that is not a biology major. That's the basic level at which you need to summarize the article. Now, some of the things in the article you will not be able to summarize in a very informative way to your grandmother. You're not going to be able to explain to your grandma how principal components analysis works. You don't have to explain that in your paper.
You definitely you don't have to explain what principal component analysis is doing.
No.
You need to understand it in order to understand parts. You don't have to explain that in the summary.
Right, and you know your roommate or grandma doesn't have to understand the name of the method, for example. But you can say, you know, something about them using the statistical method in order to get an overall measure of beak size and shape.
Because your grandmother does understand size.
Right. And, they're going to understand taking trying to get an overall measure of that, right? So use that, Dr. Quincy was calling it the grandmother test. Use the grandma roommate test, right? Grandma or roommate is going to get what you're saying. On that same level, we do have the writing center here, okay? So we have, you can get help with your writing. If you were to take your paper to the writing center, the person helping you there is going to be a teaching assistant that is also an undergraduate, probably not a science major. If they don't understand it the way you've written it, you're going to have to take another look at it. So that actually can be a pretty useful tool at this level. Now, once you get to cell molecular and genetics, you might have to, you're going to have to think of yourself as writing to someone that's in this class. Does that make sense? So the complexity of these summaries will go up over time, over the semester.
And you're going to find as you develop your explanations that you think your grandmother can understand are going to become more technical.
Right. Yeah. Asa?
Yeah. After for summarizing the paper was changed. Applying that synonym forms of science words. If I decide to take synonyms of words like as components, its sample size. My bill is able to lose its meaning, it's not that like scientific paper, and no regard as just talking about this.
Right. So the question is, when you're looking to summarize and you're thinking, I need a synonym for sample size, okay? When you look at those synonyms, you come up with synonyms that start to not mean what?
They don't look scientific.
It doesn't look scientific, it doesn't sound right, it doesn't really mean what you're trying to do. What I would say is don't use synonyms for words necessarily. I would just write a sentence about the concept, okay? So rather than trying to find a synonym for a word or a two-word phrase, think about the concept as a whole and explain it in a totally sort of fresh way.
Step back a step and say, for this assignment, do we really need to know what the sample size is?
Probably not.
Probably not.
Probably not. I mean, unless you're going to try to make it a point later, like let's say the sample size was 3 birds. In your analysis, you would say the sample size was inadequate. But that's your analysis. That's not going to be anything that was listed in the original paper to begin with.
But sample size is like ASA. Right? That's the name for something specific. Your name is for something specific.
Right.
I shouldn't be looking for a synonym for ASA in something that I should be looking for a synonym for sample size.
Right, so things that are the names of things, you're not going to really find synonyms. So rather than looking at a sentence and saying, okay, I want to express the idea in this sentence, you should not be looking at the sentence at that point anyway, right? So you should read the overall paper, put it away, summarize the concepts, and your summary of those concepts will not look identical to those sentences in the paper anyway. So I would say just take a different approach to it.
Yeah, we talked about this in one of the tables. You were looking at your paper and like, oh, I think a lot of these things are way too similar. And I sat down and said, tell me what they did. And then you told me what they did. I'm like, okay, type that into your iPad or your computer or whatever. And then you're going to find that the language is pretty sloppy and you've got incomplete sentences and stuff like this. But you have something on paper that's your voice. Now you just go back and clean that up and fix it.
Right.
Rather than starting at a different place, you're starting with your own brain. I always tell people, just sit down with a computer and your favorite beverage.
Yeah.
Write what you know. But of course, in order to do that, you have to know stuff. And that's your first, I think that's your first hurdle. But that's why we're doing these kinds of things.
I often will get hung up on wording and flow in the papers that I'm writing. And I'll get super frustrated, and then that's my signal that I'm trying too hard to force some wording. And usually for me, it's because I'm trying to say, this thing is happening with all these complex things happening around it. And so the sentence is crazy long and complicated. It doesn't need to be that way. I just have to take a deep breath and say, okay, if I was gonna say this in the most blunt, short, sort of dumb way possible, I would say, bleh. And once I have that word vomit on the paper, it's usually much shorter, much simpler, it's much easier than to make into my own words and to make it make sense to my reader.
You can also think about the writing process. So everything that you write should have multiple drafts, and people draft differently. It's kind of a continuum. You have the quick and dirty drafter, and you have the meticulous sentence drafter. Quick and dirty drafter is what I do. I get a bunch of ideas in my head. I order them in a way that I think makes sense to me, and then my goal is to get that flow down on the paper as quickly and seamlessly as possible. And then once I have a big body of stuff written, I go back and start working on it. So I'm a quick and dirty drafter because for me, I want the flow of ideas to be good, to make sense to me. A meticulous drafter is going to write a sentence and then fiddle with that sentence until that sentence is a perfectly drafted sentence. And it's going to be good. It's going to look good and everything else. But sometimes when you draft that way, what you sacrifice for perfection at the sentence level is you might be sacrificing flow of ideas at the paper level. And so, quick and dirty drafter like me, I have to go back and pay a lot of attention to the perfection of each sentence once I have the draft done. A meticulous drafter doesn't have to pay a lot of attention to each sentence because they've already done that, but then they, after the fact, have to pay attention to the flow. Figure out what kind of person you are as a writer. Recognize that there are different ways of writing, and then work with your particular way of crafting the paper.
I'm pretty meticulous with my sentences, but I found that if I don't do sort of this quick and dirty overall storyline in a somewhat extended outline form, that it takes me too long. I get stuck in the details. All right, so I want to transition a little bit in our last little bit of time here to about genetics. Because in this paper, and in the previous weeks, we've been thinking about the preconditions for natural selection, right? On the exam, there was a question about what did the authors of the lizard paper, what precondition did they not test for? I told you to say one. There were a couple of options. What were some of the things that the lizard paper authors did not test for? Most of you had good answers on the exam. Bailey, do you remember what you wrote on the exam? Yeah. So you think of the preconditions of natural selection. Guys, talk about it in your groups just for a second. I forgot. Okay, think about the lizard paper. All right, what did they test? The horns. Okay, so they measured the horns, right? Okay. So one precondition of natural selection is that there's variation in the traits. So if they measured the horns, they would know whether there's variation in the trait, right? Okay. What are some of the other preconditions? Did they measure whether there were Well, the fitness is what we survive. They did never survive. Yeah.
Wow.
So you did show some variation. It shows variation.
They should have it there,
They
so.
showed. So tired. That was You're not the only person. Okay, so what are some of the 4 preconditions for natural selection?
More offspring are produced than can survive.
More offspring are produced than can survive. So this is basically the equivalent of there's variation in fitness from individual to individual. Did the horned lizard scientists show any variation in fitness? I'm seeing some yeses and some nos. Somebody who thinks yes, what did they measure that they took as their measure of fitness? Bryce? No. What are the 2 components of fitness? Reproduction and survival. Okay, did they measure either of those?
They measured survival.
They measured survival. Yeah, they measured survival. They didn't measure reproduction though, and that kind of nods at a separate precondition for natural selection, which is what? That they're reproducing at all, right? Okay, so they could have varying differences in survivability, but if nobody is reproducing suddenly, then you're not going to have a next generation anyway, right? Okay, what else? What's another precondition for natural selection? You saw me staring at you.
I said, there's hereditary.
Okay, so is it heritable? Did they measure whether horn size was controlled by genes? No. Okay, good call. They're giggling back there. I don't know what's going on. They're plotting it revenge on me or something. I don't know what's going on back there. Okay, so in the lizard paper, they did not measure reproduction. They did measure survival. So they had some measure of fitness, and they found that there were differences in survival. So there's variation in fitness. You need variation in your trait, right? Did they find, what was their trait of interest? Horn length, right? This is where we come in with horn length, right? That's their trait of interest. Did they find variation in horn length?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got variation in fitness. We've got variation in our traits. We can assume that they're going to reproduce. These populations have survived for a long time in their environment. They're probably not all going to stop reproducing this generation. So that's a fair assumption.
What's important about that is that we don't know if the killed trites reproduced or not. See, if the killed trites that reproduced before they were, they're not trites, lizards. The trite-killed lizards were killed, if they reproduced before they were killed, they would still pass on those short-form genes. And so.
Right, but maybe not for as long of a time.
So
if we wanted a super complete vision of fitness, we would have to have measures of both of those, right? And probably even measures of whether their offspring grew up and reproduced. We have to kind of try to be logistically feasible, I guess, and their method of doing that was to ignore reproduction and just use survival as their problem. They did not, however, measure heritability. And we're going to talk now about how things are inherited, because most traits are complex, and so we need to start out kind of understanding how simple traits are inherited. I've gone way back in the span of inherited concepts, and I've got a diagram of meiosis, and I've got a diagram of mitosis. Do y'all remember what the difference is between mitosis and meiosis? Okay, so I heard meiosis is the germ cells, right? So these are going to be your sex cells like eggs and sperm. Mitosis is the division of cells that are making an exact copy of themselves, right? So what are some cells in your body that go through mitosis? Epithelial cells, okay, wherever you have some sort of tissue barrier, like a skin or a gut lining, okay? So epithelial cells go through a lot, our skin certainly goes through a lot of mitosis all the time, and it's trying to make an exact copy of itself, right? And so in this example, we've got one red big chromosome and one blue big, and that's representing homologous chromosomes. Basically, we have, as diploid individuals, we have one full set of chromosomes from one parent and one full set from the other parent. And so we're going to be super stereotypical here. Maybe the blue chromosomes are from dad and the red ones are from mom. And big is one kind of chromosome, what's called chromosome 1, and little is chromosome 2. Okay, so in each of our cells in our bodies, except for a few of them like red blood cells, we have 2 copies of each type of chromosome in the cell. Okay, so I have 2 of chromosome 1, I have 2 of chromosome 2, 2 of chromosome 3. Diploid, di, stands for 2. Ploid means copy of chromosome in this case. Okay, all right. So in this case, they look like little X's because they've made exact copies of themselves. They don't normally look like that in your cell. Normally they just look like one strand of spaghetti each. Right? They've made copies of themselves, and the cell is going to grow, and it's going to take one copy of each to the separate poles so that you end up with 2 identical daughter cells. We've got one blue big, one red big, one blue small, one red small, same over here. Okay, so you get an identical copy. These are not what's going on with inheritance. It's just your body functioning, staying alive. Okay, unless you're bacteria, this is not what's going on with inheritance. And in fact, it's pretty different from bacteria anyway. Okay, meiosis though. In meiosis, we have to divide the number of copies of chromosomes in half so that when we make an egg and it has a genome in it, and we make a sperm and it has a genome in it, and they come together, they don't have twice the number of chromosomes that they're supposed to have. So what happens is it starts off the same at the top where there's one duplication of chromosomes, but with meiosis, it divides twice. In meiosis, we want to get to the end here where we've got eggs or sperm, where we only have one copy of each big chromosome and one copy of each little chromosome. Okay, so the differences here are we've got 2 identical daughter cells to the way that it started out. Okay, 2 copies of each kind of chromosome. They came from different sources originally. Okay, but you've got 2 copies. And in meiosis, you now have just one copy. And because we're very human-centric, we call that haploid, half or half, and ploid for the number of chromosomes. Really, it should be something more like uniploid. Who knows why it was not called that? And in this case, when these germ cells unite with other germ cells, they're going to end up looking like that, right? To make another diploid person, or plant, or any other diploid animal, or organism. All right, questions? Okay. What I would like you to do in prep for next time, there's a preparation assignment that's posted on iTunes U, and it uses this basis of meiosis and thinking about, okay, these are each chromosomes, there's lots of genes on each chromosome. It's going to use that to kind of give you guys a vocabulary basis so that next time we can talk about how, if we know what genes are on each of these chromosomes, and if we know what versions of those genes they are in the parent, can we predict what the offspring will look like? Okay, so we're going to predict offspring next time. Please do that genetics preparatory homework.
I'll take your methods and results sections.
And I have your exams you can pick up on your way out the door.
Do you want the plagiarism?
Yes, please turn in the plagiarism homework.